Anyhow, I'm going to just speak a few seconds, give you a little information about what we're doing in April. So as you know, this project got several goals. First, so we can all learn more about biodiversity and why it's important. Second, empower us to what we individually can do to make a difference. And at this time, we can actually do something. This is an area that has great need, and we're learning about what we can do. And the third part is really to take our knowledge and skills and help and go out in the community. So we'll be doing more of that in April, and I wanted to fill you in on some programs. First, we need a few volunteers. Of course, programs don't work without people joining and helping. This is really going to be more for adults because it's a Thursday morning, April 24th. For a couple of hours, we need up to 15 adults to help with PA Plants Native program. So if you remember, PAIPL was here, and they support this and some other organizations. This has become more important than ever for Philadelphia. The reason is that they had a big $12 million grant from the federal government that is no longer going to them for trees and other environmental justice initiatives. So the trees that we're able to bring in and help are going to be more important than ever. This project is very simple. Other people bring trees in from trucks to the Schuylkill Nature Center. If you've never been in Philadelphia, it's beautiful, where we'll just help take them off. And they're not gigantic trees, you know, they're saplings. Get them off and tag them and get them ready for the next step, which is getting them out into Philadelphia neighborhoods where shade trees are desperately needed. And these are native shade trees, so we know they add to the pollinator. So that's the first thing, and I've got to sign up, and 3 of us on the committee have already signed up. If you can do it, please sign up or think about it. We'll put it on, Rebecca's going to pass that around. Yeah, pass it around now, and we'll have it at the back as well when we leave, so if it's something you can do. The second thing in April is our Earth Day celebration, and we are going to have the first Earth Day celebration at this church in probably 30 years, 25 years. We had an awesome celebration. Some of us remember it years ago. This will be biodiversity focused, so native plant focused and nature focused. Really fun for kids, so we're hoping that you help us get the word out, bring your grandchildren or your children or your friends, and we need volunteers again. And this is a great opportunity to sign up and help for half the day and then take advantage of all the activities that we'll be doing multiple times throughout the afternoon. It's 1 to 5. We've got a sign-up sheet for that. And among those things, a separate sign-up sheet, thanks to Joanne Rose, we're going to be doing plant-based bites. So instead of putting out junk food and lots of plastic, we're going to be putting out small plates that people can taste plant-based alternative dinners. So just little tidbits as well as fruit for kids, etc. But we need people to cook that wonderful food as we make, again, a unique kind of experience. So we have a couple of recipes for brave cooks, and I know the MLUC cooks are awesome. So think about making one of these recipes, learn a new wonderful plant-based recipe, and help us make that a success as well. So those are the three asks that we're doing right now for the month of April. Thank you so much for coming. Now I'm going to be turning it over before we start the program to our own amazing Leslie Bass, our master gardener extraordinaire, who's going to talk about this problem we have with this tree, which needs some more leaves, doesn't it, Leslie? And how we're going to be able to do that. I'll just put this here.
Thank you, Pam. Can everybody hear me? Thank you. So, yeah, we want to draw special attention to something that you'll see and maybe not be seen every Sunday when you're here, which is our slowly leafing out forest before you. And it's designed to tell everyone how many people in this congregation are stepping forward and making a pledge of sorts to do something with at least one native plant this spring. So it's called Plant a Native, Make a Difference. And when you see the video, you'll understand what this is all about if you don't already. I know a lot of you have already read the book and are familiar with the concept. But anyway, out in the hall every Sunday, there's a bowl with some leaves in it. And if you feel so moved, and we hope you will, to make that commitment, then we invite you to pick up a leaf and deposit it in the box. Very simple. And then at the end of that Sunday service, the box will be opened and we'll put the leaves up here and we'll watch our garden grow, as Leonard Bernstein said in Candide. We'll watch our garden grow. So let me explain that a little bit. I know some of you don't have access to or just don't do planting. You don't have to. It's more like an intention to purchase a native plant, and this is a plant you could pass on to someone else. Maybe it's someone in your family. Maybe it's your next door neighbor who you know has a garden. Maybe it's someone you want to encourage in the fact that they're beginning as a gardener. Native plants are very forgiving. They mostly are easy to get into the ground and to nurture. So if you make that commitment, that would be wonderful. We also will be giving you more information about sources where you can find native plants. And at our Earth Day event on April 26th, we will actually have plants there for purchase. So you could buy directly from us and help to support it that way. So that's the Plant a Native, Make a Difference initiative. And without any more ado, I guess we're ready to go. We'll have this box forward near the doors today after the video and book discussion. And if right now you already feel you're ready to do that, then we invite you to make a difference. So thank you. And I'm going to introduce Christy Perry. She and I will be with you today for this event.
I was just going to announce the book, what we're going to do. So this is an interesting book club. To me, I think one of the most important things about a book club is letting everybody share and take a turn. And since we have like 30 or 40 minutes max, I'm guessing we might only have one question or two. And we'll have microphones that we can pass around. And one simple question was just, what is your favorite part of the book? Or a favorite new thing you learned? The other question, and I'm gonna first list Doug Tallamy's, I guess I should have done this after the video. After the video. Okay, scrap that. I'll be back then.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Doug Tallamy from the University of Delaware, co-founder of Homegrown National Park. And that is exactly what I want to talk about today. It's a small nonprofit. I want to talk about how it came into being, what our goals are, and particularly what the rush in terms of joining Homegrown National Park is. There's a spider at my house. During the day, it looks very much like a bird fecal sac. But at night, it hangs from a leaf and drops a single strand of silk with one sticky glob of glue at the end and goes hunting. Looks very much like a spider when it's doing that. Now, you wouldn't think that a single strand of silk would be a good way to catch something. A web would be a better design. But in fact, they do catch moths. Moths fly in and get caught on that glob of glue. The female spider spins them around, wraps them up in silk, and then has a good feed. Then it goes hunting again, catches another moth, has another good feed, and if it has enough moths, it will have the energy to create an egg mass, a very ornamental egg mass made of silk, and that is how they spend the winter. And if they catch more moths, they'll make 2 or 3 egg mass. The real question is, why are moths flying into her single target? And the answer is she's releasing a sex pheromone that attracts particular species of moths. So all the moths that fly into her sticky glob of blue are males. They think that she's a female. She is, but she is the wrong species. I wanted to find out what the species of moth that was flying into her glob of glue at my house was, so I unraveled the little bodies that she cut loose and found out it is the bronze cutworm. And I have bronze cutworm adults because I have bronze cutworm caterpillars, and I have bronze cutworm caterpillars at my house because I've got goldenrod, which is their primary host plant. I also have the dotline white moth, beautiful little thing, because I've got oak trees, primarily white oaks, and because I don't rake the leaves away from underneath those white oaks. Dotline white cocoons are often in the leaf litter, so when you rake it away, you're waking away a lot of living things. I have the evening primrose moth because I planted evening primrose. The moth came after I planted it, spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. Sometimes it's crowded in there with several moths, but it's always very cute. I have the zebra swallowtail because I planted pawpaws. Pawpaws are the only host plant for the caterpillar of the beautiful zebra swallowtails. It would take me a long time to describe all of the species that now call our property home. It would not take me very long to describe the species that live in a typical residential landscape. There is no goldenrod in a typical residential landscape, so there's no bronze cutworm, so there's no bola spiders. There's no oak trees, so there's no dotline whites. There's no evening primrose, so there's no evening primrose moth. There are no pawpaws, so there's no zebra swallowtails. In fact, there's very little that can live in a typical residential landscapes, and we have 135 million acres of typical residential landscapes in the U.S. So we're not through. We're still developing 800,000 acres of natural areas, turning them into residential landscapes every single year. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing some pretty scary headlines these days, like the insect apocalypse is here, talking about global insect decline. North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. 2/3 of Earth's wildlife is already gone. 40% of Earth's plants face extinction. 1 million species are predicted to go extinct by the UN in the next 20 years. It's all very bad news. Now, we tend to use extinction as a metric of trouble. I don't think it's a good idea, though, because that's like going to the doctor when you're already dead. I think defaunation is a better way to look at things. In other words, the loss in the abundance of species that are actually running our ecosystems. American chestnut is a good example. It used to be the dominant tree from Georgia all the way up through Maine along the crest of the Appalachians. And then we introduced the chestnut blight, and it killed them all. Now it's not extinct. There are sprouts that come up from roots, but chestnuts are functionally extinct. They are no longer present enough in our forests to perform the roles that they once did perform. Rusty patch bumblebee is another good example. It used to be one of the most common bees in the country, but now if you find one, it's a big deal because they're on the brink of extinction. So not gone totally, but functionally gone. Defaunation, the reduction in the abundance of species that run ecosystems, is the real problem. It's local, it's everywhere, and we don't even notice it. We don't even notice it because of a phenomenon called shifting baseline. We tend to think that the way things were when we were kids is the way they've always been and the way they should be. So if we enter a world that is already defaunated, we don't notice that things are missing. None of us, for example, missed the passenger pigeon because it was extinct before any of us were born. The passenger pigeon was the most numerous bird on the entire planet. So shifting baseline means that we are losing biodiversity. We're losing the biodiversity that sustains us, and we don't even notice it. About E.O. Wilson, one of the things that was consistent throughout his very long career was his love of life on planet Earth and his efforts to save it. He wanted to save it not just because he loved it, but because he knew it was essential to our own survival. And in 2016, he wrote, "Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life." He had one simple message in that book. He said, if we're going to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we're going to have to save nature. We're going to have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the planet, or it will disappear everywhere, and that includes humans. It was a very bold statement, and he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that bold statement. And then he ended the book. He didn't spend a lot of time telling us how we were going to save nature on half of planet Earth. Of course, to a conservation biologist, that is a great idea. We'll just put half the Earth aside, and all the things that are declining can be in that half. We can be in the other half, and it'll be wonderful. But half of terrestrial Earth is already in some form of agriculture, and I don't see that diminishing. Got 8 billion people, and all of our hardscape, our roadways, our airports, our detritus in the other half. And we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we realize E.O. Wilson's dream? Well, I think we can, but we need a new approach to conservation in order to do that. We've got to give up the idea that humans and nature cannot coexist. What I want to argue is that not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. We've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. Not hang on by a thread, but thrive. We need a new attitude about property rights. We have this idea that each one of us can own a piece of the earth, and we have the right to do whatever we want with that piece of the earth that we own. But what happens on our properties does not stay on our properties. That's because each property out there is part of a local ecosystem. So whatever we do to our properties impacts that entire ecosystem, either positively or negatively. Let's think about what happens when we dedicate a lot of our property to lawn. That's going to determine whether rain infiltrates when you have a storm or whether it leaves as stormwater runoff. The amount of lawn you have is going to determine how much pollution you're adding to your local watershed, how much nitrogen and phosphorus and herbicides and insecticides that are washing off your lawn. It's going to determine how much carbon you are adding to the atmosphere every time you mow. It's also going to determine whether or not you're supporting pollinators. A good lawn doesn't provide anything for pollinators. How we landscape is going to determine how much carbon we're pulling out of the atmosphere and tying up in plant tissues. If we have a lot of trees on our property, those trees are built out of carbon, and they're also pumping carbon into the ground through their root systems. Once it's in the ground, it's very stable and can stay for thousands of years. The plant choices we make for our properties are going to determine whether we're harboring ecological tumors such as calorie pear or burning bush or barberry, which then escape our plantings and castrate local ecosystem function because they become invasive species. Finally, how we landscape is going to determine whether or not we're supporting the local food web. Are we choosing the plants that actually host the insects that comprise the bulk of the energy of that food web? Finally, how we landscape, how much lawn we have, and our plant choices are going to determine how much life our properties can sustain, which, when you add it all up, will determine how much life the earth can sustain, what the carrying capacity of the earth is. And that is an awesome responsibility. And it's an awesome responsibility that property owners don't even know they have. This also creates a grassroots solution to the biodiversity crisis. There are millions of us out there. And if each one of us recognizes that we all have a role in conservation, we all have a responsibility to be good stewards of the earth, we actually can turn this around. Remember, most of the country is privately owned. 78% of the lower 48 states is privately owned. 85.6% of the country east of the Mississippi is privately owned. So if we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail. And that means that collectively, property owners are now the hope and the future of conservation. Let's return to the lawn. Lawn is the low-hanging fruit out there. It's what we can manipulate the easiest. We've got more than 44 million acres of lawn at this point, which is an area bigger than all of New England. What if we replanted half the area that is now in lawn, restored it? Would give us, let's make the math simple. Let's say we've got 40 million acres. We cut that area in half by restoring 20 million of those acres. That's enough to create what we are calling Homegrown National Park. And it will be a huge area. It's going to be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. If you add up all those parks, it's still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. A feature of Homegrown National Park, of course, is what we call the biodiversity map. You can join Homegrown National Park for free. You simply register your property on the map, where you're located, and the amount of area that you're going to be a good steward of. Maybe you really are going to reduce the area in lawn. Maybe you're going to plant an oak tree. Maybe you're going to put an aster in a flower pot. Doesn't matter how small an area you're going to be a good steward of. Then you record that area, and your piece of your county is going to light up with a firefly. And of course, the object is to get this message to go viral so that the entire country lights up. The mission of Homegrown National Park is to motivate millions of people to regenerate biodiversity by planting native plants, removing invasive plants from their properties, and therefore reshaping their relationship with nature. What are we asking? We really are asking people to reduce the area in lawn. Lawn doesn't accomplish any of the ecological goals that our properties need to accomplish. To do that by placing it with the native plants that do accomplish those goals. We want to remove invasive species from our properties, and protecting any natural areas, we certainly want to continue to do that. There are real ecological products associated with Homegrown National Park, significant increases in biodiversity, and I'll give you some examples in a few minutes. Measurable reduction in invasive species. If everybody removed the invasive plants from their property, just from their property, we'd be 78% done. We'd be 85% done in the east. That's a great first step. There would be a significant drawdown in atmospheric CO2. Lawn is the worst plant for sequestering carbon, so if you replace it with anything else, you're going to capture more carbon and help climate change. And finally, we're going to start to create habitats outside of parks and preserves. Any bit of conservation we do outside of parks is going to help conservation inside of parks. There are also real sociological products associated with Homegrown National Park. National awareness, not just of what the problems are, but what the solutions are and what our roles in those solutions are. We're trying to change the culture. We want people to recognize that nature's not optional. It's not there just for our entertainment. It's essential, and it's essential for everybody, which means everybody owns responsibility to sustaining it. We want to convert hope into action. Hope is good, but action is even better. And we also want to merge existing national conservation efforts like Audubon and National Wildlife Federation, Wild Ones, all the land conservancies. We want to get all these great conservation efforts onto the biodiversity map. So we have a visual of how well we're doing. Remember, we've got the 30 by 30 initiative. We want to save 30% of the U.S. by 2030. That is not going to happen unless we count conservation that's happening on private property. And that is what the biodiversity map on Homegrown National Park is for. Homegrown National Park is free, which means we're entirely supported by your generosity. There's an urgency in enacting the Homegrown National Park solution. Remember that 135 million acres in residential landscapes. It's a big job. So we all need to get to work, and we all need to know what it is we have to do in order to succeed. Well, there's 4 things that every single property needs to accomplish ecologically if we're going to reach a sustainable relationship with the natural worlds that support us. We all have to. Every single property has to support a food web. Every property has to sequester carbon. Every property has to manage the watershed in which it lies. And every property has to support pollinators. Lawn accomplishes none of those goals, which is why we're focusing on it. We have to learn how important plant choice is. The plants we choose for our property are going to determine whether or not we have a viable food web on our property. There are 3 kinds of plants out there. There are plants that contribute energy to local food webs, plants that do not contribute energy to local food webs, and plants that remove energy from local food webs. The very best contributor across the country is one of the oaks. They're contributing more energy to local food webs than any other plant by far. A good example of a non-contributor would be a ginkgo. Ginkgo biloba from Asia. It's a pretty ornamental plant, has nice fall color, but nothing can eat a ginkgo, so it's not adding any energy to the local food web. Example of a detractor would be a non-native plant that has become invasive. Not only is it not contributing energy to local food webs, but it escapes our properties, things like bamboo or calorie pear or burning bush or barberry or porcelain berry. They escape our properties and they push out the contributing native plants that are supporting local food webs. So the net result is a loss in energy in local food webs. We need to appreciate how important caterpillars are in local food webs. Caterpillars are more important than any other type of plant eater because they are transferring more energy from plants to other animals. And that's because so many things eat caterpillars. It turns out they are the meat and potatoes, the bread and butter of local food webs. If we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars in them, they're going to be failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. And that's why keystone plants are essential to our landscapes, because they support the most caterpillars. Remember what a keystone is. It's the stone in the middle of the Roman arch. And if you take that stone out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of the local food web, the food web collapses. Just 14% of our native plants are supporting 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. That 14% are the keystone plants in our nation. Keystone plants in the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that hold that house up. They are the support system. You can't have an ecological house without them. And we can't build a house out of wallpaper, which is what we've been doing with our ornamental plants for the last century. We have to recognize how important small properties can be to conservation. Remember, 82% of us live in and around cities. So we all have a responsibility to conservation, and that includes people with tiny properties. And if you have no property at all, container gardening can be very effective. Let's say you live in an apartment. Use container gardening with native plants. You can still supply pollen and nectar to a number of our pollinators, to migrating monarchs. If everybody in that apartment building did it, just picture what's a pile of bricks would be really actually a well-planted ecosystem. And if you go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, there's a section of that site which tells you which plants are the best plants to get for container gardening, depending on which ecosystem you live in. So we now know what the best plants are for container gardening, so everybody can participate in conservation no matter how small an area you have. Fortunately, we do have a silver bullet in our fight against both climate change and biodiversity crisis. They both have a similar solution, and that is that conservation works. And there's a number of examples of this. There's an area in Illinois called the Nachusa Grasslands. It's 3,800 acres in size. There are now more than 730 native plant species in that space. 180 species of birds use it. It used to be a cornfield. Point is, nature is enormously resilient. Now, there's something common to each one of these conservation approaches, and that is whether or not they succeed depends on the decisions that you and I make. I had a student in my class a few years ago, Amanda Crandall. She was writing a final exam, and she said, well, conservationists claim to be managing species and habitats. What we're really managing is people. And that is so true. We need to change our adversarial relationship with nature to a collaborative one. That is the only path forward. And the question is, can we do this? Well, of course we can do this. You don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live, and if you do, it empowers you. More and more people recognize that the Earth has some serious challenges, environmental challenges these days, but most people feel powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn, one person can modify your light system, one person can add a pollinator garden, one person can use container gardening, one person can remove invasive plants, one person can garden with keystone plants, one person can fire your mosquito fogger, one person can join Homegrown National Park. There's a lot of things one person can do to totally revitalize the ecosystem on their property, and then enhance their greater local ecosystem instead of continuing to detract from it. And this also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire Earth's problems. You'll get depressed. Just worry about the piece of the Earth that you can manage. If you own property, it's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy. Help a park or preserve. They're all underfunded. They're all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. So I hope Homegrown National Park will provide the motivation and the guidance for millions of people to tackle these conservation challenges. Because whether or not we do that now is going to determine nature's fate and then ultimately our own.
Want to bring more nature home? We've got tools to help. Use our Get Started guides for simple steps to plant native. If you need plants, check out our Keystone guides to find the best options for your area and our Buy Native Plants page for great purchase options. Explore our resource directory for local services. Then add your space, no matter how big or small, to the HNP Biodiversity map. The map creates a dynamic visual of where the movement is thriving and where action is needed. Add your landscape as an individual, or add your business or organization to work together toward a common planting goal. Stay connected through our newsletter, social media, and Facebook group. We are thrilled to have you as part of the movement. Visit hnp.org to get started.
All right, I'm fired up. Anyway, so in trying to run a book club this big, I think maybe what we can just do is go around to anybody that would like the microphone. We have two people that are going to be close by if you want to turn, and perhaps just what was your favorite part of the book, or something new that you learned, or the movie if you've just not read the book, and perhaps what is the first step or next step that you are excited to take? Are you going to do small steps? Are you going to jump in with both feet? Do you have any hesitations or obstacles to making good changes? So whatever you feel like sharing. Does that sound good? And if anybody has a better idea. So how many, go ahead, Joanne. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, so Christy came out about a year and a half ago. We bought her services through the auction, church auction. So she pointed out to us that we had some plants back on our property that were harmful. They weren't not only not giving, they were harmful. And so we've been so busy, we haven't got, that's top on our list, okay? And the other thing is, it's physically demanding, so we're going to get some help, and we're just going to make it a main focus of our lives, because it's important for us and our children.
Hi, I was just going to express my, the biggest eye-opener was the percentage of space that has been taken over by non-native, and that impact of it is amazing. So it just really is a motivating thing to do what we can.
I like the idea of, sharing this, because it's a small gathering here, essentially. And so I joined the Homegrown National Park because I just have a twin with, small beds, but I've pretty much gotten rid of most of our lawn and just started with pulling out the invasives and, putting in natives. And then also I got a Homegrown National Park sign. So I have that in my front yard so that people kind of, what's that? And I've actually talked to different neighbors about things. And one neighbor ended up thinking she was being very helpful, blowing all the leaves out of my bed, front bed. And another neighbor texted me, and I was downtown Philly doing something. And I said, oh my gosh, I was devastated because I'm thinking of all these insects and things that were like under the leaves. And so I texted the other neighbor who did the blowing, and I said, I know your heart was in a good place, but. And so it's like every little moment that you can do some, education and teaching. I think people are open to it. They're just ignorant. They just don't know. And I think that was the best thing reading that book was, how many acres we have available through just our lawns alone, and that we can actually make a difference, little by little by little. So I think it's a great effort.
One of the things that he emphasizes in the book, that if you're going to do this, you need to make it look neat and intentional. Otherwise, you won't gain converts. You'll just have angry neighbors who think your lawn looks like a mess. And I thought that was an important message.
I want to reply to that one second, because I know Michelle Detweiler last Sunday in her presentation said we have to kind of get used to messier. But I think a lot of times what people do is you can put the messier part farther away from the sidewalk, or some people that put in a whole meadow for their front yard, they still have a mowed path or a mowed edge, and so that's giving the message that it's intentional. But I think overall it is messier. But you're right. I mean, I guess you have to make a good decision for your own situation where you live.
I just had 2 questions that maybe somebody here could answer. Can you hear me? Okay. Does anybody know if you're ever supposed to remove the leaves from around your tree, or do you just leave them there and just let them keep piling up? Anybody know the answer to that? Okay.
Well, it all depends what you're talking about. I mean, in a forest, the leaves just fall on the ground around the trees. But in a suburban setting, we tend to have leaves. We have lawns, and then we have trees kind of stuck helter-skelter, where we decide they should be, so it isn't like a forest. And it depends on the type of leaf. Like oak leaves tend to be very oily and sticky, and if they remain on the lawn, they will stick together and kill your lawn. Not that we care that much about the lawn, but you're justified in getting those off your lawn. And what you want to do around your tree is you could leave some leaves, but you should always avoid piling up any kind of soil or leaves right against the trunk, because that could cause rotting. The tree naturally has a straight line trunk and then what they call a flare, and you should leave that flare visible. So sometimes people recommend having mulch or leaves kind of like a donut around that area, and it also prevents animals from getting up in there and perhaps gnawing on the tree or whatever. So I would say you have to look at your situation, decide how many leaves you have. It's good to keep them all on the property if you can. Move them to an area where you can make a leaf pile, begin a compost pile, and leave the leaves is one of the messages that we get here. So it kind of depends on your circumstances, but I would say think about all those factors.
Can I add one thing to that? I heard 50 degree temperature. So if you want to remove them, wait until both the low is no lower than 50 degrees, which is a while. I don't know when that happens here, but that's when then all the bugs have come out who are living in those leaves, which is one of the reasons we're keeping them there.
Hi, can you hear me? I have gone in a little bit over the top. I've gone in a little bit over the top with a lot of these things, and I have mulched my entire lawn over the last 3 years. And one of the beautiful things, and left the leaves, and my neighbors give me their leaves too. But one of the really amazing things is you can see at the property line between my neighbors and me, my soil is about 6 inches thicker, and that's all carbon sequestration. So that's all, saving us all and all that stuff. And the other thing is that when you're planting your natives, plant something for yourself. So like pawpaw trees are the most delicious fruit that you've never tasted because they don't travel well, but they're native, and they support the swallowtail butterfly, and they taste like a combination of a mango and a banana. So feed nature and feed yourself.
So I'll jump in. I was just gonna add to what Joanne said, because I too purchased Christie's services through the auction a couple years ago, and I still have all of her documents, and it's a little bit overwhelming. And like you, I've done a few things, but I have a list, and I guess I feel like all this reading and discussion about what we can do has helped me understand that I can do one thing at a time. I don't have to do it all at once, because it's a lot, especially removing some of the invasives that are on my property.
Hi, I just wanted to mention that one of the problems with natural plants is that the deer really like natural plants. And the reason the invasives do so well is the deer don't like invasives. And so sometimes, depending on your property, you might have to keep the deer out of your property, either with something like deer scram, or I put a 330-foot deer fence around. And the difference between our ground outside the fence and inside the fence, it's like a desert outside the fence because the deer population is so large, they eat anything that comes up that's green. But inside, some of the plants are starting to come back after being denuded by the deer.
I also wanted to talk because we've tried a lot of these things in our yard. We have the deer-proof fence and a lot of native plants and the milkweed. And we're in the process of looking at selling our house. And after taking realtors through, and I kept saying, well, this milkweed here, you know, we did this deliberately, and this is a native plant. I realized that our realtor needs to be educated about what kind of yard we have. I was thinking of buying, I bought this book before and read it and gave it to my daughter. And now I'm thinking, oh, I need to leave one on the coffee table for the open house, because the realtor, if the realtor doesn't understand and the people who buy it, they'll say, well, this is a nice house, but we need some lawn here. You know, and I think it's a lot of education for people.
I was just going to say, I think we all need to get a little less afraid of little pupae, little caterpillars, little bugs that are around the property, because that's what all of this is about, is inviting them in. And so I always remember growing up, it's like, oh, well, you got to go out and squish this, this, and this. And yeah. Another plug I'm just going to give for a garden that I spent some time in is the Chanticleer Garden. On their website has, right on the front page, a diversity study that they've been doing. And it's really another layer of education of, like, you know, 900 moth or whatever, you know, all these amount of species that they've been counting in the garden. Granted, it's not all native. Be curious, you know, if Mount Cuba did a similar study, because these numbers keep going up. And the more that, again, the environment is supported, these little creatures keep multiplying, and that's what we want.
Thanks. I was just to 2 points, Barbara's point. In doing this project, I feel like, and I've never read his book, you probably have, Gladstone, To the Tipping Point. And any kind of idea has to get to a tipping point. And that's very much what I'm trying to do with the Biodiversity Project, because I think, you know, I had 5 years ago, I thought my Pachysandra was beautiful. So there's the learning and changing your own cultural perspective, which is one of the very hardest things that we have to do, and sharing. So we have 12 other faith groups who are part of this Biodiversity Project. They're doing different things. Some of them are reading the book. Some of them are doing their first native garden in their churches. Some of them had Michelle Detweiler when they learned from Christy about her. So it's just, we're all moving together to this, and I feel for you, Barbara, because we do this and we feel like this excitement, and we realize that we have to move other people along to help us all. And the other thing I wanted to say is children. You know, we have some kids here. I mean, I remember growing up in California and playing with bugs and all the insects and the butterflies, and that's what we want for our kids. We want them out there playing with these animals and being part of nature, not seeing something, you know, just perfect and beautiful, but realizing that we truly are interconnected. So it's my little spiel.
Yeah, and if any of the children want to share, like if you have a favorite plant or bug at home, feel free to
I
share.
want to just throw something in here very short. and this actually applies to something that Pam has shared with us earlier, which is we may not be well acquainted with nature or connected enough with it, but nature is out there. It is out there. And Pam found this out because she put in a native plant. And then after it had grown and got to the blooming stage, she happened to go out and look at it, and it was covered with pollinators. It was covered with bees. They're out there. All you have to do is put things in the ground or in a container, and they will come. They're out there looking for these opportunities, for these places to nectar and to pollinate and to, find insects. Insects hang around these plants, and then other predators come and take those insects. So it's out there, it's happening. It's just that we are pretty oblivious to it. But it's hopeful because we could be part of it. And so I just want to encourage the rest of you to maybe think about things when you read the book or saw the video. Anything you want to share about your responses to them.
That one up here.
Yeah, I was Googling nurseries around here that sell native plants, and I couldn't find any. Does anybody have a list or?
We do.
Okay, I need that.
The closest one is Jenkins Arboretum, and their opening day is our Earth Day, but they sell all summer long, and then there's one in Media, Redbud.
Redbud in Media?
Yes.
Who's raising their hand?
Hi, everyone. As somebody who is not a gardener, and I think as my wife would like to say, if we put a plant in the kitchen, it would probably just die. Actually, so a comment was made earlier about things being overwhelming, and I think for a lot of people, these types of things even seem overwhelming, even if you're trying to get to a more natural landscape. The interesting thing that happened to us last year was that for one reason or another, we have about an acre of land, and the lawn didn't get mowed from May through July. So to anybody here who doesn't feel like you're an experienced gardener, we had about 15 oak trees pop up simply by not mowing the lawn for 2 months. Now it also helped there wasn't much rain, so the grass wasn't, exploding. But that was really interesting for us because I read Doug Tallamy's book about oaks, and you don't even, in some cases, need to go to a native plant nursery, which are wonderful. The one in Media, and Jenkins as well. You can just start with don't mow your lawn for a little while and see what pops up. And you might be surprised with how many squirrels and blue jays have put acorns all throughout your yard.
We will be selling native plants on our Earth Day as well. You're Lisa, right? I need to meet you. But she's going to have a table there. She's been planting some native plants from seeds for us, and she also has a edible native plant business, so like the pawpaw trees and other vegetables and fruits. So that'll be great. Some of the big ones we were able to get, the butterfly weed, which is wonderful for the monarchs, echinacea, the purple coneflower, and one of the goldenrods, and some asters. So some of the really keystone, very important plants we'll have right here for you on Earth Day.
So, like the gentleman spoke before me, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. So I decided I was going to plant some blueberry bushes, and I decided to put a fence around it because I have a lot of deer. And up pops 4 oak trees in that area, and 2 of them are white oaks. So that's what happens when you just let it there. And I was full of pachysandra, so I pulled all the pachysandra out and tried to put some Pennsylvania sedge in it. So, and when I started, I guess it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I started with just planting some native plants, Then PIPL had a thing where you could actually buy, they order in the springtime native plants, or you can, they give you a website where you can order native plants. So they'll send you a variety of native plants, and I plugged them around. Some of them took, some of them didn't. I have a deer problem, so some of them get lost to the deer, but others have caught on. And gradually, I'm just doing a little bit more and a little bit more every year. And I have an acre property, and it's going to take a long time. Probably won't be finished. I'll be finished before it's finished, but you know, just plugging along the way.
Just a comment about things that pop up when you didn't even realize they were there. Once we put up the deer fence, we had sassafras popping up everywhere. I didn't even know there was sassafras there, but they just started coming up because the deer weren't taking them down.
Cool.
Yeah, a couple of comments have the same problem that Pam listed and others have, and that is a long time ago I decided I wanted to get reduce the lawn size, so I kept planting Pachysandra. Now I got to pull it all up, but and which is not easy to do. But I think one thing we just have to always have in the back of our mind is when you see a lawn, you think immediately ecological desert. When I go back to near Erie, where I was growing up, land is cheap and people own all this land, and they just, the bigger the lawn, the more impressive it is. But when I'm riding by there, that's what I think. And that's, if you're ever with somebody and they make a comment about how beautiful that lawn is, just let that come right out and verbalize it. It's an ecological desert. The other thing is, what was the third thing I was going to say? Oh, we live in Tredyffrin Township, but we're right up against Radnor Township. And there's a huge old development that is just all oak trees. And every year they rake them out to the side of the road, and Radnor Township comes along and picks them up. I guess they don't charge you, that's just in the tax base. So I'm wondering if that's something else we should concentrate on besides our individual responsibilities, one step up. I can envision writing to Radnor Township, of course they won't change immediately, but saying, you know, those, and after you read Doug Tallamy's book, and you realize how much is raked off of those lawns to make them beautiful, and there's huge piles of oak leaves that aren't going to do any good. They'll go to compost someplace from Radnor Township, but if somebody has a property that's big enough that it's supporting a number of big oak trees, they certainly could leave some leaves around those oak trees, and they could certainly compost them, as opposed to having the taxpayers pay to pick up those oak trees. So.
Does Radnor have an EAC?
Yes.
Probably.
Go to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Standing right
Yes,
next to
they
it. An environmental advisory council, they're advisory. They don't have any power over that, but the fact is they've been welcomed by the township into conversation. I would go to them first.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Tredyffrin has an EAC too, and we got involved with them to get rid of plastic bags.
Do you know what happens to the leaves they collect? Sometimes, I found out in my township, they were having a leaf collection service where all you had to do is rake all your leaves to the curb, and then they come and suck them up into a huge truck. And I found out those leaves were being taken somewhere into Lancaster and turned into mulch and bagged and sold as compost. And I thought, what? You know, we're paying this, it's actually our refuse company. But anyway, now what they do, I'm not really sure what happens to them. They just, if you don't want your leaves, you bag them, you leave in the corner. You bag them yourself.
Yeah.
And there's no charge to you for that. And so many people do it. And I remember at one point I would go and I'd walk next door and take their bag of leaves and bring them back to my house. But yeah, that's another point of conversation.
No, that's a good point. We don't live in Radnor
with a
Township,
neighbor,
it
like
doesn't matter.
You could leave some of those on your beds. They'll help mulch the soil, keep it safe from erosion, provide places for insects and birds go in there. At this time of year, the birds are going in there and looking for seeds and looking for insects. So I would go to the EAC and see if you could get them on board.
Yep, thank you.
There's something called a soft landing too that they didn't mention in here, but if you do have an oak tree, surrounded by lawn, you can make what he calls a soft landing of whatever diameter around the oak tree. So under it, just focus on changing that lawn to native, and all the little bugs supposedly that drop off the oak trees and burrow in the ground, and it's super beneficial since the oak tree's #1. I just wanted to say too, if you have a homeowners association, I watched a webinar on how to work with them to try to bring about change. I wanted to mention that you can have sort of lawn that uses sedge plants that looks more like lawn, but it's native, which is cool. And what else? And we are actually going to be, I'm about to propose to the board, but we're going to be converting some of our property here to native on sort of a bigger scale, if anybody wants to be part of the planting team. Anyone else? It seems like we're about to wrap up here.
So I just wanted to bring, okay. I just want to bring one thing up. I love the idea of not mowing your lawn. I heard that from a couple people. The challenge is if you have a lawn person and that's their livelihood, and I'm struggling with how do I ask him not to mow, part of my lawn for the month of May. So open to ideas about that.
I even heard sort of I can't remember what the argument was against that, but I don't know if it's quite as beneficial as it sounds.
Oh, really? Okay, good.
So for this year, we've actually put down some posts. We're just quarantining a portion of our lawn this year, just to see what'll happen in the quarantined section. But the question that I have, because this came up in Doug Tallamy's book on oaks as well, and I assume there were a lot of similar themes in both books. Ticks. Pennsylvania and ticks and Lyme disease. Certainly that was something that, when we first moved to Paoli, every time our dogs ran out, they came back with ticks all over them. We were trying to manage them. The author had said, I've gotten the antibiotic, 6 times and I'm fine. But outside of fogging, you sit there and you go, okay, we're always checking her for ticks and everything else. If anybody has any ideas, I would love to hear them.
You mentioned fogging. You can, I know if you have an ecological, this is your lawn service, right? Yes. That would fog. Okay, ask them what the active ingredient is. They can actually use a cedar oil, which is just an essential oil of a plant. And that will not, I don't believe it should harm any other insect. But if you should find out what they're spraying, because you could just be wiping out all the insects, not just the ticks. So there's also ways of using pyrethrin on your, I don't know if they still have this, they're called pyrethrin tubes. They look like the cores of toilet tissue paper, and they put pyrethrin in there, which is a natural substance, and it's like a little tunnel, so the mice will run through there, and they'll get it on themselves, and it will kill the ticks that are on themselves. So you'll probably have a lot of little mice, too, which are also carriers of the ticks. And if you could exclude the deer from your property, yeah. But I think it is a challenge if you have free-running pets. They are going to pick them up. Cats pick up ticks, too.
All right, we have some, you want to comment on that?
I wanted to comment on the tick tubes, because I've been making them for several years. You get your toilet paper roll, you get your lint from your dryer, you buy the paramethium, you spray it on on the lint, you get your chopsticks, you stick it in the tube, and I put them all around the yard. And I think we've decreased the ticks both in our yard here and around where we go camping in the woods. So I didn't know paramethian was actually, yes, that was actually natural.
It's derived from a flower. I'm standing here trying to remember which one.
Yeah, well, anyhow, I feel like it works, and the
marigold?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
The mice and the chipmunks who are carrying the ticks, you know, take this stuff back to their nests and, you know, have their babies sitting there killing the ticks. So that's what I do.
So he has, in taking care of the lawn, let a lot of it grow, for that reason, trying to get just more natural. But one of the other things besides worrying about ticks is we have tree of heaven come up all over, and letting the lawn grow means those get bigger, and when you cut those, that just pushes them to sprout up other places. Does anybody have a solution? Do you just go and nip them in the bud, or how do you deal with that? Yeah, he's gone around to do that. It's a lot of work in maintaining that then. Yeah.
I think she said one of the solutions is to paint. I mean, glyphosate has this very bad image, but a lot of the properties, like natural lands, for example, if it's used responsibly, sometimes they have no other choice. But it's used very responsibly, and one way to really kill things is just when you cut it, you just dab it. There's a dabber with glyphosate, and then it'll just, otherwise it's an endless job, I think.
Yeah, I just want to circle back to the leaf collection and Radnor. I don't live in Radnor now, but I used to, and the operation that they have is actually pretty beneficial. They take their leaves, they mix them with wood chips, and that naturally degrades them. Wood and leaves in nature occur together, so they have to put them together. And it turns into a really great topsoil, which in the past has been used to reclaim coal mines. I don't know what's happening now, whether it's more commercial or not, but I just wanted to give you a little bit more of a balanced perspective on that. It cuts both ways.
Yeah, and they give it back to the members to take compost out in the spring. So they're mulching it for you. Yeah. And there is native pachysandra that came up so many times today. It's called Allegheny spurge.
So I still have lawn, and I actually collect the leaves on my lawn in a mower in the bag, and I use those leaves for my compost, because if you're going to have a compost pile, you need brown or stuff for the compost, because you can't just leave compost in there. So I mix that with my compost.
Yeah, and we started doing that here a couple of years ago. We used to have all of our leaves, we didn't rake them all off, you know, it was mostly off the pavement, but we would have them hauled away, and you may have noticed in the past 2 years, we now have 2 spots for the leaves. We'll alternate years. We just pile them up, and I was amazed. I think they were turned once because I randomly had a tree guy here who turned it for me, the pile, but it was soil the next year. So if you want some soil, it's next to the dumpster right now, and the other huge pile is in the corner of the parking lot. All right, I think we're finished. Thank you all for being here today and bringing your interest. And keep your eyes open for, our Stoneleigh. We'll have a Stoneleigh walk. We'll have Earth Day, lots of things going on. Thank you.